Hey, congratulations for your new documentary, Afterwar.
Thank you. Thank you.
This documentary is actually very fascinating, especially the fact that the subjects that you actually picked out. But tell us what's what started you on this path to do this documentary in the first place.
In 2007, I was invited to Kosovo to sit on a jury at a film festival. And I went, partly sort of out of curiosity. I often say yes to festivals in places that I almost don't know exist. And that was my relationship with Kosovo. I did not know where it was. I knew it existed, but I did not. I had children in the 90s during the Balkan War, and I was in the States and I wasn't really following. So when I was invited, I was like, okay. So I went, and I think the experience of going to a post-war country was really good. I mean, it was really it made a huge impression on me to see that. And I just realized that it's something that we know nothing about. Like we know a lot about the drama around war, but we know almost nothing about what happens after the drama is over and people try to go on with their lives. So I met a local filmmaker in Kosovo who said, "Look, would you like to do a film?" And I was at the time very interested in staged reality. And I said, yes, we could do something staged. I would like that. Um, and he said yes. And he suggested we work with the children that were selling on the street because it was a problem that started after the war. And we started doing it, and the collaboration fell apart because he wanted to do a journalism piece, it turned out, and I did not. And then he was like,
Mhm.
okay, I don't feel like doing it anymore. And then I had some funding and a potential film. And then I found somebody else locally to help me, and then I moved on from there. So that's where it started. It was a lot of coincidences, I would say. It was not my intention to make a film in Kosovo. Yeah.
So did you start this film in 2005 after that film festival immediately, or did you wait for a while?
No, it was 2006 I was there, so I started it in 2007. So yeah,
Hmm.
pretty immediately. I mean, I met this person and I said, okay, let's try and do something. And then I got some funding, and then I started, the research and sort of the planning of the film took maybe a year and a half, finding the kids, building the trust, writing the script, I spent a while doing that before we actually shot the film.
Well, then tell us about the process of finding the children in what to in Kosovo. What were your requirements, and how did you convince them to participate initially into this project?
Yeah. I mean, there were no requirements except that they worked on the street. I mean, I had no interest in doing any kind of sorting. I did no sorting whatsoever. We worked with a couple of younger guys who helped us do a lot of the legwork on the street. I don't speak Albanian. And we very slowly would meet with them, talk a little bit, have a coffee, do little things over a long period to build the trust. Um, in the beginning, I mean, they were not interested in me even taking a still photography photo of them. They were
Mhm.
definitely not interested in that, but the process was over a year, where I also tested, what happens if you put them in front of a camera, like how does that even feel to them? Is it something that can work for them? Are they comfortable? Can we build the trust when there's a camera in the room? So all these little trials we did over the span of a year, while I also, the film, the way it's constructed is that I have done these quite extensive interviews on audio that have been transcribed. And then based on those interviews, for the first short that I did in 2007, we we wrote monologues, almost like theatrical monologues for the children to perform.
Mhm.
So also just that the process of writing and talking to them about what they would say or wouldn't say, I shuffled the monologues around and I asked them to perform in the film. So in that way, I think a traditional documentary, you typically approach somebody and say, do you want to be you in a film? That's the contract, right? And I didn't make that contract with them. I said, I'm interested in your story collectively, all of your stories. And do you want to perform in a film about that life? So I removed it from the private and the individual and kept it in a collective space. So they certainly felt ownership over the story, but there was no sort of stepping into the private space. Like I also didn't go to their homes or, there was none of that when they were children. When they were adults and I did Afterwar, I did that. But when they were kids, I did not.
So in essence, this was scripted, but it's still their stories.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything is their stories. I mean, maybe it's better to talk about the longer film because it actually gets a little more complex when you talk about the long film. And I mean, what I did with Afterwar is I also interviewed them extensively. There we also did more, I said, okay, they're grown-ups now. I need to find a new form that can give them some agency that's appropriate for a grown-up person. And I felt the form of the short film would have been a straitjacket. It would have felt like they wouldn't have the agency as adults. So I knew I wanted to develop the language, the film language, in order to give them more agency and for the form not to feel like a straitjacket, both for the audience and for them. So I did a couple of first steps when I went back to them, and I visited their homes and their families, and I thought, okay, now that they're adults, I feel comfortable doing that. I wasn't comfortable when they were children, but I felt comfortable, and I also felt it was important because one thing I observed when I started doing Afterwar was that now that they were adults, the things that occupied them are the things that occupy, obviously, young people in their 20s, which is, what kind of job am I going to have? Am I going to get married? Where am I going to live? How is, there's a lot of future building when you're in your 20s. Most of what people in their 20s do are things that they do for their future. They get educated, they start a career, they start a family, and that was also true for them. And so I felt the whole private, the whole domestic part of their lives became very important to me.
Hmm. Now, so you started as a short film with the children. Did you always have the intention to revisit them later on?
Never. No, I know I had absolutely no intention. But doing the short film was a big experience. I mean, primarily meeting them, they made a big impression. They became unforgettable for me and for the crew. And also the way we worked was made a big impression on all of us. It was a unique film, the way we worked and meeting them. So it was always a film that sort of stuck out of everything I had done. And and then I had contact with them over the years, me or people from the crew. I worked with a local Kosovo crew, and they would meet them, and some of them would help them, or there are different relationships sort of in the group,
Hmm.
but nothing formalized. And then social media was growing in that period as well. And I followed them on social media. They followed me, and I got very curious. I was like, "What's going on? Like, what is this guy doing in Cologne all of a sudden?" I was like, "How did he get there?" Or I could see the religion growing in importance. I got curious about that, so I started to get very curious. And a film like Boyhood, I think it's magic when you see people grow on screen. And you almost never do it, but I think when people age on screen, I think it's magic. And so I also had this greediness, because I thought, wow, I could actually show something about their life over a longer period, which which I could do because I had the old film. And I also, when I was sort of following what was going on in their lives, I was struck by the fact that, they struggled as children, but this struggle just continued. And I
Mhm.
thought we were very poor as storytellers at telling the story on film about the struggle over a long period of time. It doesn't fit in the Hollywood narrative. You know, in the Hollywood narrative, we like that things get resolved and become hopeful and change. It's all about change. And what struck me with them was that they deserved more change than they were having. Things were fairly repetitive in terms of what they had to struggle with. And I thought there's an opportunity to make a film about that, you know, and and then in 2000 and I think 17, I got a little bit of funding to sort of more formalized go back and have a meeting with everybody. And so what I did is I met with everybody and I showed them the old film because they were children when they had seen it and did it. And I showed it to them and we talked about the experience. And I asked them if they were interested in doing another film. And most of them were. And then I proceeded with the work. So that's from 17 to 23. We worked on this film.
So as adults now, when you actually met them, did you notice significant changes with themselves? Because I want to say, as children, they were hopeful. They had like dreams to leave, you know, to proceed on with their lives. But in essence, what how you portray it as adults, it almost seems like they're just stuck in the mud.
Well, I mean, I didn't going into the film, I didn't have any direction on that. I was an observer. Everything it is written, but everything that's written is based on these interviews and observations and what they would tell me and what I would observe. So I didn't try to steer the narrative in one direction or another. I was very much trying to, in that way, it's purely documentary. I was
Hmm.
trying to portray their life as it is. I didn't try and portray something that I don't feel is true for their life. And then of course there can be, Gëzim's father is not his father in real life, it's an actor. But his father is dead now, but he did have that kind of relationship with his father. So but yeah, so there are things that are factually maybe not true, specifically, but they're emotionally true. I think the emotional truth is there throughout. What they feel is true. So I didn't have an opinion about that or a direction that I wanted to go in. I would have loved to
Well,
do a more full film.
tell us about doing the reenactment scenes, with your subjects and bringing in actors in some particular scenes.
In terms of how I worked with them, or what are you thinking?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, working with them because you have real subjects trying to tell the real stories, and yet you also have these actors who that they appear to carry conversations or be in the background
mhm.
um, of certain scenes in your film.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a fiction director, so working with actors is what I do in my life. And I treated the cast as actors too. They are directed just like of course, my technique in directing them is a little different from a professional actor. And a lot of the people who are acting in the film are also real people, but they have just been hired to play a different role that's not themselves. So, for example, there's a wedding scene in the film. So, Besnik is playing himself as if he was getting married because at the time he wanted to get married, but he hadn't yet. But I wanted to have a wedding in the film. The bride is an actress. The woman next to Besnik is his real sister in real life. I don't think she's acting anything but herself at a wedding. So in that way, it's mixed to show the situation. Yeah, yeah. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Well, I want to know how you approach the real subjects into acting those scenes because I did notice with the father scene or the wedding scene, for example, and how you can make your real subjects comfortable, acting those scenes.
I mean, I think at this point they behave like professionals. They've been trained during the shooting, and we have shot over a number of years. So they have a very clear understanding of what it means to perform for the camera. We had one day, like later on the shoot, the cinematographer was hit by COVID. I was hit by COVID. It was pretty difficult, and we had a short period of time to shoot. And for one monologue, we asked the camera assistant to shoot. And we're standing there, and it's a monologue that Xhevahire, who is sort of the narrator in the film, was doing, and he's a really good performer. We used to call him
Mhm.
Robert De Niro even when he was a kid because he's really has a presence and he can command it in front of the camera. And he said during the shooting to my the Albanian that I work with who translates for me and does everything else with the cast and he said, what's this guy doing? He doesn't know his job. Like he felt comfortable enough in front of the camera to criticize, to like judge whether the standard was high enough behind the camera. And he was right actually that the guy wasn't so comfortable. So I think there was a level of you could call it professionalism that developed during the work, because we had a certain discipline we worked with. So I think
Mhm.
they understand what it means to perform in front of the camera and learn a line. They learn their lines and they come in like any other actor. But of course, the way I direct them is a little bit different than I would direct a trained actor because I can't use the same references in my work with them that I could use with a trained actor.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I also, when I was watching, I found it fascinating because Kosovo has changed so much,
Mm.
and you showed a lot of the construction, the buildings and so on. But you also showed how some areas haven't changed.
Mm.
Is it is this like a parallel to the lives that these people are going through after the war?
Well, I mean, I think what their situation is, which is probably typical for a lot of post-war societies, is that there are people that get left behind. There are people that prosper, through connections or through politics or through, you know, a lot of different things. They are able to work their way up in the world, and that's definitely true in Kosovo. And then there are people that get left behind, and that's they have gotten left behind, I would say. Like somehow the efforts to stabilize the society after the war has not included them properly.
Mhm. Well said, well said. How did you want to end this film?
I mean, I actually, the monologue that the longer monologue, it's not the end, but that to me it's the emotional end of the film. Shiva has a monologue about how her life is difficult and she sometimes would rather sleep, which is and that monologue we shot fairly early on, and I was very moved by it. It comes out of her interview. I wrote it, but it's out of her interview. It's almost verbatim what she said in an interview. And then we staged it into a monologue. And when we had staged it, I was very moved by it. And I just felt like this has to end the film. So that was maybe in 21 that we shot that. I don't remember 22, and I thought this has to end it. So I wrote the rest of the film in order for this to become the ending.
Mhm. Have you still been keeping touch with them for the past few years? Are their lives have changed or is still the same?
I mean, actually, everybody's life changes in different directions all the time. I would say, I mean, they definitely struggle still. They have been, they are my co-creators in the film, and they have traveled with me. They're not here in New York with me, but they went to Berlin at the world premiere, and they were in Copenhagen for the cinema release. So they have actually, and they were also part of the release in Kosovo, of course. So they've been quite active during the release of the film, and been very amazing in meeting the audience. I mean, it's just been very touching to have them meet the audiences, I think, for the audiences and for them. So there's been a journey that we've had after the film has been completed that's actually, I think, has been very significant.
Well said. And what's your next project? I'm not, not saying that you should do another 15-year project.
I'm actually using the same method of writing, but this time I've turned the method on my own family. So I'm doing a story about my father's childhood in the 50s in the countryside in Denmark. And I've been interviewing all his siblings are still alive. So I've been interviewing my family about this certain period in their lives. And I'm writing a script based on that, which will be with all actors.
Excellent. Well, let me wrap it up with one last question about Afterwar. As audiences have a chance to, to watch this film, what is the one most important take you hope they walk away with after watching Afterwar?
I really hope that they're a bit haunted. You know, I hope that meeting the cast and afterward, I hope that they won't forget them. I hope that
Mhm.
they make an impression that haunts them a bit. You know, I think I definitely want the film to be haunting. And I'm not trying to make people haunted. It's not that, but I do think that with the film, it's been very important for me to sort of um, make the humanity that they have
Mhm.
very unforgettable. Because I think we have a tendency to, when people have misery, when people are suffering in their lives, we have a tendency to, in a way, minimize their humanity and instead make them an object of our pity. And I hope people won't do that, but actually that they will be unforgettable. That's my hope.
Well said. Well said. Well, thank you very much for speaking to us about your documentary Afterwar. Everyone needs to check it out and enjoy the festival in New York with
I
yourself.
will. Thank you so much.